Welcome in, everyone. My name is Penn Center, and we're joined this morning with Zach, aka E to the 2I Pi. We are here with Season 2, Episode 4 of Beyond the Blackboard, where we're going to talk a little bit about classroom flow.
Yes.
I don't have a cower command, Jeff, sorry.
Yeah, I was going to say, we need some kind of something along those lines. Okay. Wow, there's a lot here.
This was a big chapter, wasn't it?
This was a big chapter.
Chapter.
So this is the book, by the way. I'm going to show the cover here. Beyond Thinking Classrooms. This is it. And I'm, man, there's so much here that I want to talk. But let's just start with this concept of flow. Have you ever been in flow, Penn? Have you ever had like a work state that's in flow?
All the time.
Think of that, like all the time. Like, tell me about that. Like, what's the time that's happened for you?
when I'm in
like
flow?
Yeah, like
so. I often kind of think about it as like I like the phrase "locked in" a lot. I hear that phrase a lot, Zach, especially when I'm talking with people that have like ADD or ADHD, and that's what I feel like. I feel like okay, I'm kind of physically and mentally ready to do the thing, and I just go, and it's like I'm in it for like 2 or 3 hours. You know what I mean? Like that's what it feels like to me. It feels like I'm there and I'm ready to do the thing, and it's hard to describe it other than that. I know Liljedahl talks a little bit about you kind of like lose your sense of time. I don't usually lose my sense of time, but for me, it's like a feeling of being present and like actually wanting to engage with the topic or the item that I'm working on. So, I was going to ask you.
Well, so before I'll let you ask that question, but like, in just a sec. Before I say that though, there's actually research he bases this off of a guy whose last name I tried to pronounce, and I could not. Okay, I am not going to try, and I apologize for the Hungarians in the audience who know how to pronounce this name because I cannot say it. Six Zent Nilhai. That's my best I can give it. That's about all I can do. And if anyone can do better than
Mihaly C.
Yeah.
Mihaly C.
I couldn't. I try as I was I usually read it out loud. As I read things aloud to myself. I know that slows people down when you read, but for me it actually helps. And you think about people who read novels who can't put them down, for example, or like when you want to binge watch a show or something, you just like you're like engrossed in that story, locked in, right? The video gamers do this. Even those who may work. It can be in any kind of work. I think there have been times where I've been programming and I'm like in a flow state where I just don't want to be interrupted, and it frustrates me when my kids get in my hair a little bit. Right? I can definitely empathize with what's here. And the goal, I think, that Liljedahl is talking about in combining with our Hungarian friend's research, I'll just call him our Hungarian friend so that I can, I don't know if I can get the pronunciation right. I don't want to. There it is. There on screen. Six Zent Mitali. Are you playing it right now?
I am, but it's my mini USB is plugged in, so it's going into the ether and not into my ears.
Yeah. Anyway, I think this is this research about flow. The idea is to get students into a flow state, meaning that they are working on the task, they're enjoying it, they're focused on it, they're not worrying about anything else other than the task. And the goal, I think, Liljedahl is trying to achieve is to be able to help students get in that flow state. So before we get started too much, we need to focus on the goal that the thing that Liljedahl is trying to solve.
Right. I just want to take a quick look.
I'm pausing there for effect for a second.
Yeah, no, that's totally fair. I want to open up the book and see kind of what notes that I had written down here. I don't think that was the only problem that he brought up, at least not the only one that I wrote down. I also underlined the fact that, trying to work with 20 to 30 students at the same time can be quite overwhelming, as we're trying to direct all of those students in a particular direction. So it felt like that was part of it as well.
Mm-hmm. And so there's like this dual nature, right? Like I completely agree. We have 20 to 30 students in a classroom, perhaps even more. I've even been up to 44 at one point. So for those who have had 40 plus in a classroom, I feel that. But if you do that, so if you take that group, and then you have to keep everyone learning optimally. There's a phrase that's often used in the learning spaces called the zone of proximal development by a researcher named Vygotsky, who basically said the same thing. You want to keep students learning optimally, where they're learning and that they're not frustrated, they're not bored, they're doing the thing that they should be doing in the class, right? And they're learning at their optimal, the zone of proximal development, meaning the optimal learning that can happen for them at any given time, right? So how do I think, so sort of combining our two ideas, how do we help each of those, say, 30 students learn optimally in our class as much as we can?
Right. That's what I kind of gathered from this as well. And I mean, there were a couple assumptions that, maybe not necessarily assumptions, but a couple of observations that I thought Liljedahl brought up that are important. This idea of varying skill level, maybe varying ability to process information. So there are certain issues, I think, that arise when we start to think about stuff like this. Mm-hmm. And the question from my perspective is, how do you start to address some of these issues, right? If we believe that we want to keep students in that zone of development or zone where they're, for me, it's just, I just want them to be thinking about the thing that I want them to think about. That's how I kind of characterize it. If I want that to be true, how do I do that for varying abilities? How do I do that with a large classroom? How do I do that? How do I get students to kind of think about the thing that I want them to in this situation, right? Like that's to me, that's the key question.
Mm-hmm. I agree. And so let's start just talking about so now that we've framed what he senses as a central problem, there are a few things that, because he's looking for measurable things, as any statistician or any researcher would want to do. When you try to measure learning, if you're trying to measure thinking, that's very difficult to do. The black box of the brain, as you might call it, is hard to pin down. We don't have an MRI on everybody in the classroom. That just isn't practical and expensive, and it would be a very heavy invasion of privacy, et cetera, right? I don't want to do that. So I think he wants to find some proxy to measure.
Right.
And so what he does is he says, well, we can measure engagement, so we're going to try to measure engagement.
Which and that's I kind of have a problem with, Zach. I'm not gonna lie.
Right. Well, and let me can I just pull a quote here, right?
Yeah.
Because this is the quote I underlined, and it's at the very beginning of page 146. If you happen to have your book.
Yep.
Here's the quotation. It's one sentence. If we are thinking, we will be engaged, and if we are engaged, we will be thinking.
I underlined that too.
Because this is an if and only if statement that, like, the second I read this, I was like, the first half seemed okay to me. The second half seemed sus.
If we are engaged, we will be thinking?
Yeah, if we are engaged, we will be thinking. I was thinking about that. Like, you could be engaged with stuff, but not thinking about it. You can play a game and not really be like...
Yeah.
For example, I was watching Games Done Quick from 2025. And just yesterday, I was watching a speed run of Portal 2. And I doubt that guy was thinking through the game in real time. He was engaged for sure.
Right.
But I don't think you have to be thinking about the puzzles in that game per se in the same way that a novice who's going through the game the first time is going to be experiencing, right? So like for somebody who's automatically been able to figure out, and actually you could argue he was engaging even to listen to. Like the level of engagement for a speedrunner in that context might even be less, just because the speedrunner happens to know the game so well and is an expert and can basically time it. It was actually pretty uncanny watching him because he's like wanting to. He could say, "I know exactly when Wheatley is going to say this. I'm gonna, I'm gonna do this action. I already have everything scripted in time. So in some ways, there's no real like, there's engagement but not thinking.
Yeah,
there is sort of an.
I also wrote down that like I can be engaged but thinking about the wrong thing too. So, and then I also wrote down I can be thinking about something but not be engaged as well. So I think there just needs to be more clarity on what the thinking and engagement is directed towards, maybe, to make this make more sense.
Right. So there's another thing that made so. There's lots of things here. I actually let me see where else I want to go with this. There's a little diagram that he uses that I think is a useful model, and we were talking, the stream was starting, that all models are wrong, but some are useful. This notion that there's a zone of frustration for students, or that there's a zone of boredom for students, versus this zone that's in the middle. I mentioned Vygotsky because the zone of proximal development feels relevant here. It's basically the same idea, but he uses the word flow, which is the space between frustration and boredom. I'm looking specifically at page 148.
I'll draw it and I'll put it up on the board for everyone to see.
Yeah, because I think this is a good model. It captures something that we want for students, right? We want students to feel successful. And so when you're in the classroom, you want people to feel successful. And the way of talking about flow is a way of defining success. There isn't like a firm metric here. And again, the notion of flow is very different for different students. But, and what flow looks like. I'll just let you write that down. But flow is like, I think, the optimal place for the learner. Yeah, and Rex brings up a really interesting point here. Feeling successful is not the same as being successful, right? You can feel like you crushed a test, but did you actually crush it, or did you, is that because you know something, or is it because you I don't know, maybe Dunning-Kruger or something like that?
Yeah, or you're just very good at taking a test.
Yeah, very good at taking it, or exactly you can crush a test that really didn't assess much other than, say, memorization, right?
Right. So anyway, I've tried to kind of capture the idea here. The idea that Liljedahl is trying to frame is that there's two axes that he's talking about or thinking about. One is the ability, that's your horizontal axis, and the vertical axis is challenge. So as ability increases, but if challenge doesn't meet the increase in ability, students get bored. So that's them landing over here, right? So if students have high ability, but the challenge isn't there, they fall into this area of boredom. Or if the challenge is too high, but the ability in the student is not there, then they land in this area of frustration. So the goal as the teacher is to try to kind of monitor and keep them within these boundaries where it's labeled flow. So you kind of want, students might be kind of improving their ability, but then once we kind of get over here, we have to give them a challenge, right? Like something more challenging. So he often talks about kind of this movement through the flow space as either first allowing students to explore the question to increase their ability, and then once we think that they might be hit with boredom, we're going to up the challenge a little bit. And so we get this kind of natural pathway through the flow space.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so now that I like this model here. Now, as we mentioned with our 40 students, if we hypothetically have our 40 students, I'm imagining a scatter plot here, right? On this little XY axis plot, I imagine each of our students will represent their initial condition will represent a point, right? Somewhere on this plot. Some are frustrated with math class. Some are bored. Some are right there, right in the middle of it. Like I'm following, Mr. Penn Center, right? Like this is I totally understand what's going on. But what happens is our students don't just stay at those initial conditions. They move, right? Throughout our task, they're going to be moving somewhere. So like, X number 1 will be going to, may start getting more ability and start heading over to that direction. Yep. And then Mr. Penn Center will say, oh, look, I need to help this person do harder things, so I'm going to give them a little bit more challenge, right? And so on and so forth. You could continue moving each of these students, or if you want to think of these as groups, you could too, because Liljedahl would say 40 people is unmanageable. Maybe we have 10 groups that we're going to have, and so I can manage 10 groups better than I can handle 40 individual students.
All right, so maybe we kind of group a couple of these students together, and now all of a sudden they have, their starting spaces here, right, or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So I can kind of see that argument too, right? Kind of
for you stats nerds listening, K-means, right?
Something like that. Yeah, exactly. Kind of a K-means approach to it. Yeah.
So, and actually, if we were doing this according to Liljedahl and being authentic, we would do we would have this randomly grouped. We're just choosing. I think for spatial reasons, I think it's convenient to circle these by relative positioning, but it might be it's better if you do this randomly so that the groups don't have too much homogeneity. Okay, now, here's where it gets interesting. Because, the idea now is to give tasks that are differentiated, right? So when we're in this space and we have our groups, we say, okay, we're going to give you a task. We're going to start you off with perhaps a task that has a low threshold and high ceiling, as we might say. So the example in the book is with factoring trinomials, and I think that's as good as any. You could do this with any other concept you like with an asterisk, and I want to come back to this asterisk, but I want to be authentic to Liljedahl first before I be critical at all. We want to make sure that we have some common ground to talk about. So, let's say I was teaching about factoring trinomials, or actually, let's do something different. Let's do completing the square. How's that?
Sure.
That's one I like to go back to, and it's related but different. Okay, so let's say I go to the front of the class and I say, okay, can anybody tell me about let's make a trinomial like x squared plus 6x plus 9. That's one of my favorites to start off with. Can we take the trinomial x squared plus 6x plus 9, and how do I make a square out of that? And maybe I have algebra tiles, and I'm trying to think, okay, how can I make a square out of this trinomial? So I need to, and what do I mean by square? I mean I'm multiplying the same factor by itself to get x squared plus 6x plus 9. So and Penn's drawing this out on the board right now. We have maybe 1 square, 6 rectangles, and 9 squares of appropriate size. So how could I arrange these tiles into a square? And Penn would say, I'll let you, like, how would you respond? Maybe you can be our student and model this. Like, what would it look like to make a square out of that?
I would probably start with the big one. And then my next thought would be to maybe arrange some rectangles.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of this way. Oh, this is going to be terrible. I'm a terrible student. Look how terrible.
I was going to say you're being a terrible student right now.
Yeah, but look how beautiful.
Okay.
Look how beautiful my diagram comes out. Wow, look at this. This is beautiful.
Okay.
Wow. I've made a square. I've made an American square. feel very American about this.
I was gonna make a comment about the flag, but I decided I'll let you did it for me.
I think that's not the way that we're supposed to do it, though.
I think that looks like the Bank of America logo.
It does.
It sort of does. So Pen, I'm going to be the nice teacher here, and
yes.
I'm going to say,
guide me in your ways, oh senpai.
Oh senpai. Nihongo o dokimasen. So I don't speak very much Japanese. Anyway, so ideally these would be, we can swap them. That's not too bad, right? I'm just gonna swap them.
Yeah, I mean, ideally these would not be the same size as the square, right? So it would definitely not come out to be super nice.
Right. Well, but this is sort of the point. At the beginning, you want to give a task that is that works out nicely, that illustrates the concept in a low threshold way, so that every student could be successful with this ideally, right? And so if I make a square like this, I can notice, oh, I have a x squared, which has length x, and length 3 on the top, and then x plus 3 on the bottom, or on the side, so that I have all squares used, and my total is x plus 3. So what thing could I multiply by itself to get a perfect square out of these tiles? The answer is x plus 3 squared.
Right.
Okay. So at this point, this would be my perhaps Liljedahl would say this is how we would start the task. We give everyone something they can be successful with. They know what a perfect square looks like, and say, okay, now what I'm going to do is give you some squares that I'd like you to complete. And you can use your algebra tiles and so on and so forth. But I, as the teacher, have a list of, say, 15 problems that are going to gradually build in difficulty, right? And the goal of this task is to have students work in their groups to complete the square in the style in which we just did, right?
Yeah.
Along the way, providing levels of challenge. So, for instance, the first thing I might give to all students, I'd start everyone on the same page and say, all right, let's have you complete the square with x squared plus 10x plus 25. And I send them all their vertical non-permanent surfaces, and they're in their teams, and they're working on x squared plus 10x plus 25. So then what I would do is I have a list that's already pre-prepared that gradually builds in difficulty as we go along, right? So maybe we start here, and then the next thing I give them, I say, okay, once they've solved that one, I pass another problem to a team that succeeds. So maybe I give them something like x squared minus 8x plus, what would it be, 16? I think that's what it would be, right? So one minus, I throw a minus here.
Oh, a minus 16?
Let's throw a minus in.
Do you want the minus 8x?
Yes, minus 8x. So this would be one potential option, is to say x squared minus 8x plus 16. And it's highlighted in red here just to emphasize that's the thing I'm changing, right? So as the teacher, I'm now asking a team to move themselves along that flow diagram. Now I'm trying to increase their ability by being able to solve more problems. Right. And so then I then maybe do some of these for a while, and then I'd go in and change the quadratic even more, so that now I have non-perfect squares. So you could imagine what would happen if I had like x squared plus 6x plus 10. How do I engage with that, right? Like, how do I engage with a non-perfect square? What do I do if I can't do it perfectly, right? And have students be like, well, what do I do now? What's the closest square I can make? That kind of thing, and then so on and so forth. You start changing different aspects of the problem until you can build the maximum capacity you want your students to have, which might be something like 2x squared plus 10x plus 24, something like that.
Yeah, like a non-1
like
coefficient.
Yeah, so an a bigger than 1 case.
Yeah.
Right. So I would ideally level these in such a way that I'm developing their ability while also keeping a sameness of the task that we're given.
Yeah,
Right?
I kind of underline these ideas. So Liljedahl is talking about the variation theory, which I haven't read, but they
Mm-hmm.
said that the first principle is that we can only see variation against a backdrop of non-variation. I thought that was a really interesting quote. So
Mm-hmm.
we
Mm-hmm.
only notice changes provided, I guess, the previous things haven't been changed or aspects of the previous thing haven't been changed. Is that how you would interpret that, Zach?
Yeah. So you want sameness, but you want variety, right? Like I think that's the idea here. Is you want to have some like a common goal, but you're changing it up just enough so that it's not boredom, right? You want to minimize that boredom. Again, we want to stay away from boredom, but we want to also get away from frustration. So how do
Right.
I want to keep this optimal flow state?
Right. And I think this is potentially really advantageous because he talks about how you can make these really small changes or small variations, and when you look at the entirety of the lesson, you've actually covered a lot of ground.
And he even claims, and so I'll speak for Mrs. Pi a bit. Mrs. Pi went to a training with Liljedahl where he had a time lapse video of a 45-minute lesson he taught with students doing the factoring lesson that he talks about in his book. There's a really cool trinomial factoring lesson, and he shows a time lapse of this whole lesson and him mentoring students in real time. And it can be done apparently. Like I think what he's saying is like you can do this, and I've done it. Like here's this group of students I worked with. We were successful in helping students get to a point where they had this capacity at the end. I think he says in the book that he's done this so that you can do factoring with a bigger than 1. And the idea here is, again, I'm being fair to Liljedahl and just presenting it as is. Being fair to Liljedahl, he says, if you do this, you're able to cover more ground doing this than doing the more lecture-based, sit down, take notes style of learning. That he's had success in helping students learn more in a 45-minute time block than not.
And one thing that I thought was interesting about this is it connects back to what we talked about last time, where he mentioned that often as teachers we're teaching students to understand like the hardest example they could possibly see, whereas this kind of procedure starts at the base, and through that variation you eventually get to the top, right? So it's almost like we're consolidating from the bottom rather than teaching to that top example, right? That's what it felt like to me.
Well, and it's not that you're not teaching to the top example, but you're building capacity for the top example.
Yes.
What you're doing is you're intentionally scaffolding so that you go from simple to complex, if you will. There's a level of there's a ramping, if you will, of difficulty. So I have this staircase that I'm following, and I'm trying to help students gain their go on the staircase and make steps towards reaching the ultimate goal. And students may get to varying places on that staircase, but ultimately they're making progress towards the ultimate goal of understanding, say, how to factor quadratics with a bigger than 1.
Yeah, I like what Rex says here. Basically we're going from 1 plus 1 to category theory. Easy.
And I just want to emphasize, just because I might be a little extra here, but I think for just the listening audience, it's important that you do this in a scaffolded way. This is not exactly discovery, right? It's not exactly you're not doing pure discovery of things. Like you are discovering things for sure. You are supposed to make connections in your brain. If you call that discovery, where you have to develop an algorithm that makes sense of something, I don't apologize for calling that discovery. But at the same time, you're making the connections, and Liljedahl is pushing for the student to make connections to what they already know, rather than just figure something out completely with no guidance whatsoever. I want to differentiate between that because those are very different things. And I know a lot of critics of Liljedahl will say that this is a discovery method, but it's not in the way that you think it is. I think more times it's helping students make connections to what they already know. But if you call that discovery, then call it discovery. Like that's something that's okay with me as long as we're clear on what that means.
Yeah, I've never really understood the definition of what discovery-based learning is personally.
Well, I think
this certainly feels teacher guided to me because, like you said, like as my group is working on this problem and as they're getting the hang of how to do that initial question, they're heading in this direction, right? And then as soon as they get here, it's actually the teacher's prerogative to go, okay, well, let's vary that question a little bit to keep them in the flow state, right? That's kind of how I'm thinking about this. So that's one possibility. The other possibility is, man, the students aren't really getting what's going on here. So they're kind of teetering towards frustration. And so what you're going to do as a teacher is come in and say, okay, well, what previous knowledge do we have that's going to help us solve this problem? Or how can I structure this problem, I guess, in such a way to, I guess, bring that frustration down would be another possible way of doing this too, right?
Yeah. So, and there are ways to do that. This is where you as the instructor are monitoring. You can't get away from monitoring through this whole process. So that I think what would happen if this were going to turn into a pure discovery lesson, I think that would look like a teacher sitting in the back of the room and saying, okay, kids, here are some trinomials, complete the square.
Right, and that was exactly my thought too. It's like the only way that this would become discovery is if the teacher just decides to not do anything, which I don't think is the case for most teachers in most classrooms.
Right. And that's, I think, where we need to be very, we have to be very intentional about calling discovery what it is. It's unguided. It's completely unguided. That's the feeling I get from it. But this framework that Liljedahl is proposing is guided and scaffolded.
Yeah, I like the likeness of, we talked about this a little while back, of you're bowling and you've put up the, what do you call those?
Yeah, those gutter protector
the
things.
protectors.
What are they called?
Yeah. So on one side you have frustration, on the other side you have boredom, and it's the teacher's duty to kind of keep the ball within the flow state, right?
Yeah, right. No, this is now. I'm going to be a bit, and I want to be a little critical of Liljedahl here, because ideally, all tasks in mathematics fit this framework, right? So I picked completing the square because I know that one fits this framework well, and it's not in the book. So this is something that makes sense. You have a nice scaffolding that there's a nice level of challenge I can introduce at each level. But I would even argue that the me leveling is inherently flawed. Like, no matter who you make this for, if I try to level things, I don't know that there's one unique leveling that will work for all students. And Liljedahl says you should have this all prepared ahead of time, and you really, like, you should have a list of problems for ahead of time for sure.
Yeah.
But it's really hard to figure out what the next step for each student is. And I don't know if there's like a uniform way to do it. And I don't know, Penn, like I'm looking for sort of a reaction to that.
A reaction from me, specifically thinking about...
like, is that something, like, so, I mean, is that true that there's some kind of unique leveling that you can put on every, like, for every content? Like, is there some way I can say that there's a unique scaffolding path that I should take all the time, or is that going to depend?
No, I would say that that's not possible, and it's always going to be dependent on your classroom dynamics, your student variation, and maybe even your ability to teach the particular topics at hand too, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of confounding factors there.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to make sure. I just want to make sure I was saying that correctly. The other thing is, I find it interesting that this is actually sort of a positive. When I think about this method, a lot of it starts with induction, right? When I think about induction, not proof by induction, but inductive reasoning is in pattern recognition. In some ways, a lot of these tasks are asking students to notice patterns. And then we talked about last time the concept of consolidation. that consolidation happens deductively. So after the initial work of exploration is done, then the teacher gathers everyone together and deductively says, okay, now that we've developed some strategies and we make some presentations and we talked about what that looks like last time a bit, I can now deductively say, here's what it means to complete the square. Here's what it means to factor trinomials. Here's what it means to pick your topic, right? So that's where the deductive part, and I think that respects what people know and how people learn, is that you learn by seeing a pattern and saying, I see this again and again and again and again and again. I should codify that. I should say, let's make that a thing that is a page in a book somewhere, right?
Yeah.
It's almost like that's the pages in a textbook that should exist.
And I've actually seen teachers doing that, where they go through their lesson and then all of a sudden they have like a specific page that's dedicated to the concepts or the ideas that they've talked about in the class.
That's right.
Right, and so students can pull up this book and go, okay, this is the stuff that we learned already for future lessons that they might need that information for.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think in some ways it feels more powerful if the class writes that, right? Like if the class wrote the book and say, okay, maybe that's your homework assignment, is to go write the page that's going to go in our class book that we're going to give everybody. And maybe that could be like a cheat sheet for an exam or something, right? Like what was the thing, what were the strategies we learned, and how do we codify those strategies? This is something, if I were going back in the classroom, I might do, is to give, to do this, to go and make said book.
And that turns the knowledge generation from a telling perspective into a collaboration perspective too, right?
Mm-hmm. I agree.
Hey, welcome in.
Yeah, welcome on in. I think so that's great. The other thing is, one of the concerns that Liljedahl brings up is the notion of finishing. This concept of finishing the tasks, right? Like somehow what we want to prevent students from being able to sit down and be done.
Right.
Right?
Right.
And so, like, say I get to this, I have this completing the square lesson, they finish all 15 tasks, which would be pretty tough, I think, to do. But say you were able to complete everything, what do you do?
As a student, you're like, cool, I'm done. Now I'm going to go sit and not think about math for the rest of the lesson.
Yeah. Right? And that's what you do, is you go sit down and you get to chill out and flip your phone and go watch TikTok. I don't know what you do, but you figure out something. And one way around this that I found helpful was actually something I did in my master's project. So for those of you who don't know, I did my master's project on how students understand infinite series, and I did a similar kind of thing. This was a modification of something I had seen at the Park City Mathematics Institute, which is by the Institute for Advanced Studies. Anyway, I went to this teacher workshop, and what they did is they taught us about Markov chains. Mm-hmm. And in teaching us about Markov chains, they did exactly what Liljedahl did, except they gave us basically a 2.5-hour block, put us into teams, and said, okay, here are your sets of problems, go. And they told us that we were not expected to solve all the problems. In fact, there were too many problems to solve, that you basically have to be a content expert in order to answer all the questions in the time allotted. And the point was to go and explore the problems, right?
Right.
So when I did my master's project, I took that idea, and as I was implementing it in my class for infinite series, I remember trying to design problems that I knew, that there would be so many of them that we didn't have time to solve them all. And that was okay.
We never solved them all, Zach.
Right?
I was a part of that. What I mean. Part of that class.
Yeah. And when we did real analysis, right? That was the whole idea, was to never solve them all. Because if you solve them all, that means I, as the instructor, did a poor job of planning. I didn't make sure that every person was challenged, right? So that every student was at a point where they could achieve their own flow. And I found myself and my team working at different places than my peers. And that was okay. Some days I was very slow. Some days I was very fast, under some definition of slow and fast. But because there were times I remember being in some of those groups when I did this experience, and being like, I don't know what's going on. It's sort of humbling to be in that position at times. And then there were other times where I'm like way ahead of the team, and I'm like, oh, okay, I probably should slow down, but I also am enjoying working on these other, like, more advanced problems, if you will. So there's this sense of, but for me, I was able to be in my flow state because there were so many problems there that not everyone could solve them all.
Right, and I guess another thing that would be really interesting for us to talk about at some point, it might not be today, but how do you set the classroom up in such a way that the students are comfortable saying, can we slow down? Like, I really don't understand what you just did there. Mm-hmm. Right, like I think there's an underlying, I'm trying to figure out the word, but there's kind of like a cultural thing in kind of North America where we're just super happy to sit back and not ask a question if we don't understand something. I don't know if that's psychological. I don't know if that's like a learned behavior. I'm curious, maybe just to pick your brain a little bit on that, Zach.
Yeah. Well, and I like what Obi says here.
Culture TM.
Culture TM, right? Like that's exactly, you have to set that culture. So going back to for those of you who haven't seen my channel, a few years ago, Penn Center, so Brian and a few others did a real analysis course where I was a moderator, and I would run it in sort of a Liljedahl style. That's about as close as I can come to it. But we did real analysis together, and at the very beginning of that course, we set some expectations and norms of how we were going to talk about things and how we were going to work on things. And one of them was, we help each other, make sure that everybody can sort of follow the reasoning, and it's okay not to finish all the problems, et cetera, et cetera. Setting those norms ahead of time is really important when you do this. And so I think that's part of what Liljedahl is talking about is you need to make sure that everyone has, he doesn't say like have more problems than you need. I'm adding that just from my own experience and for what I've seen others do. However, I highly recommend having more problems than you can do so that every person can be challenged. We should also talk about the flip side of this, where there are going to be those who struggle a lot, right? If you have the student who maybe comes in, say, tested in below grade level, and you perceive the student needs some extra mentoring, what do you do? Right? Like, how do I support that student? And I imagine this is going to be a bigger issue than not, just because I feel like there are more. I feel like if things were truly bell curve like, we'd have equal amounts on both sides. But I get the feeling as I read social media now that there's a lot of students who are coming in below grade level. So maybe we should take a moment and talk about how to help them. Like this is a good time.
Right. I think maybe what you're implying is rather than the variation in your students being normally distributed, it's almost bimodal now, probably. At least that's what we're seeing a lot at the college level.
Or even slight right skewness.
A skew,
right? Like you have this, like you have a right skew graph. And I wonder, like, some of the suggestions Liljedahl makes that I would probably do for myself is to work with the student ahead of time. Let them know what's coming, right? Like, give them a little bit, don't give them like the answers, but give the student something to engage with so that they can be successful. Like maybe even do a little, I don't know if pre-teaching, like maybe that's appropriate depending on your context, but you can.
He called it preloading, which I thought was interesting. As if you can just download the information to the student ahead of time.
But I wonder if it's more the pre-teaching feels wrong and it feels disingenuous because then it's saying, oh well, we should just give people the answer beforehand. What I think really is going on is giving some priming. It's almost like you're priming the problem.
Yeah.
I like priming better because what that suggests, say I am going to talk about completing the square. Maybe there's a reason why I get the algebra tiles out for the kid and show them how they work, right? Give some kind of scaffolding so that when we do this activity the next day, they're ready. For example, I could see that being priming the pump, knowing what's coming and mentioning it. Okay, and there's some interesting things in chat here. I'm catching up with chat. I know I was finishing my sentence. I wasn't monitoring chat, but there's some interesting things here. that I'm not sure how I want to. I'm skimming through reading all of these first.
Yeah, it's a pretty tricky topic to talk about. How males and females differ
That's right.
in the
Well,
classroom.
and that's
Like that's a top, like a probably 2 episode topic of.
well. I was gonna say that we should have said discussions too. I think they shouldn't necessarily be like those can be polarized, but like you could say the same thing about race. You can say the same thing about other like there have been correlational studies done to show like your zip code tells you your performance on standardized tests.
Right.
And I've seen these before. Like this is actually really the segregation that can happen is ridiculous. And I've been like, I think these are topics for another day, but something to keep in mind that your parents' demographics can have a huge effect. Your gender, your race, all these things, for some reason, seem to have an effect, and they shouldn't. But all things being equal, we should have equal, normally distributed, and it wouldn't matter and students with disabilities. I'm thinking of like many different groups here. This goes beyond just gender, but I do think this is something to talk about.
And I guess like I'd push back a little bit and say like, how are you measuring these things? Too often it's against some kind of standardized in quotation test.
I have lots to say on that. That's
you and I both have
fun
a lot.
Topic.
Right, we both have a lot to say about that. And I'm sure there's other confounding factors here, right? Like if we think about race, for example, there might be language barriers at play, right? There's a lot of other confounding variables that have to be thought about when we talk about these kinds of topics. So.
Yeah. So I think these are topics to talk about, and just keep it in the back of your mind. It's not something that you want to ignore, but just keep it in mind that this is one reason why it's so important to know the students you have, not the ideal students you want necessarily. You have students that are here. They may or may not be what you expect, but we're supposed to meet people where they are. We're also coming off of a pandemic that has done wonders on just about everybody's learning. And like that you were mentioning your college just a bit ago. I can only imagine the differentiation you're getting in applicants now versus applicants say 10 years ago. I hear stories of that. Maybe you can speak a little bit more later or now if you like, but I don't want to put you on the spot. But
I will say that a buddy of mine found mathematics, like K-12 mathematics instruction books from like the 1940s or something like that.
Oh, wow.
And comparing to what the current curriculum is, it's quite interesting how I would really love to go through those with you and compare them to like the Utah curriculum or something like that. It's really fascinating to see how they taught, like what the lesson design looked like back then versus what it might look like now.
Oh, I actually have on my shelf. I'll pull it out real quick. Just a second. I have to. This reminds me.
I love when Zach gets excited about stuff like this.
So,
chat.
Maybe we will do this. We should have like an old style book, something or other.
An old style book off.
The book off, right? So while we're on the subject of old books, I'm trying to find the publication date here. Yeah, this book right here. I'll show it to you. This is a gift from my mother that was given to me. White's Elementary Arithmetic. This is from 1883. It's crazy. The kind of like I think it'd be cool to go through and I have to show it to you sometime. Like once we'll have like an old book stream or like maybe even a season where we analyze books and talk about the content therein. It's sort of a fun look at to see how things have changed.
I was just seeing if I think I might have accidentally deleted his text to me. Oh, that's super sad. Okay, that might actually be the book.
This one?
It might actually be that one.
This would be this book?
But the author had a full series, so it started at kindergarten and went all the way up to like calculus.
I mean, it says here this is a 2-book series, so...
Oh, okay.
There you go. So I don't know. I think this is meant to be arithmetic, but it goes through all the things that you would learn basically through grade 8. except for maybe linear equations and proportions and all that. You might not do any of that, but it doesn't have much geometry either. It looks like it's just arithmetic, which is sort of interesting too. Geometry was introduced, or I believe, during World War II, because they needed warriors who knew geometry and algebra, projectile motion, and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
So, anyway, fun things for later. This is just like brainstorming, perhaps season 3 or 4.
Yeah, once we get through March, we'll have all of April to brainstorm. I think the 5 practices would be interesting to lay kind of the groundwork, and then where we go from there. Some of these discussions, I think, are going to be interesting to have in light of some of this background pedagogical knowledge, right?
Yeah, no, and there's another book I know we've talked about. I've mentioned it before, but the book Motivated deals with some of these issues.
Right. Horn, Ilana,
Ilana Horn has some things to say about it that I think is very timely and relevant. So, anyway, those are topics that I don't want to ignore, but we need to talk about. I think those are healthy topics for another day.
And I think they just need a more fulsome discussion than what we can do in 5 or 10 minutes.
Yeah.
Right?
I was gonna say, like these are some comments that I'd love. I think we need nuance. That's why I'm brushing it aside right now. Is we need nuance and context before we talk.
You need to give Zach and I some time to find some of the sources to bring to the table to talk about. And if we do it well, we can actually provide these sources in advance too. I think, right?
I think that's right. Right,
so people can read. And we can actually have a good discussion about these topics.
Yep, 100%. And like what Jeff is pointing out with the New York Times, for example, I'd love to go through it. Like that kind of stuff. Help me compile a list of things to consider so that we can have a thorough discussion of this topic. These topics. It's not just one. It's like many. The effect of the human side of learning that we need to keep in mind as we do this.
Right.
So please, DM us or send it on our Discords. I'd love to engage with these topics as appropriate.
So we talked a little bit about what we might do to prime students before they enter the classroom. I think there was also a really interesting section in here about how to manage students that might be teetering into that bored area very quickly, right? And Liljedahl gave kind of like a laddering, right? Doing to justifying to explaining to teaching to creating, which I thought was interesting. So he laid out a very clear pathway of how to target those students and keep them hopefully engaged in the activity. I'm not sure if there's anything that you wanted to talk about in there.
These are more modalities, I think, of what you're doing with the content, right? I'm thinking along the lines of Bloom's taxonomy. It's like how the way you're engaging with it. Are you doing the math? Are you justifying the math? Are you explaining the math, et cetera, et cetera? I find it interesting that he says explaining and teaching are different. And I was trying to piece together why he would say those are different. And justifying and explaining are different, right? Like there's some, it's maybe the audience you're talking about. Because when you're justifying and explaining, in some ways those feel very similar. And explaining and teaching feel very similar, but it might be the expanded audience or the people you're talking to that matter. I don't know. Maybe it's like self to small group to large group or something like that.
That's how I kind of thought about it. Like justifying was proving to myself that I'm happy with the answer that I did. Like in other words, making sure it's not just some kind of rote response that I've just written down and not really thought about and processed. Explaining is explaining it to somebody else. So can I explain it in a way that one other person would be able to understand my justification for this process? I agree with you that the explaining to teaching, I think there's some gray area there, but I wonder if the teaching is kind of like seeing how somebody else is approaching the problem and providing hints, right? That's not direct explaining.
And Simplex's point, so Obi's mentioning here, tutoring is not the same as teaching. 100% agree here. Those are very different activities that, he mentions Sal Khan of Khan Academy, but other, that serves a different purpose to tutor than it is to teach. That also deserves some nuance and some discussion later on. But
Right.
maybe on a different episode. But I certainly can agree with the sentiment.
Hello, the Beldam. Welcome in.
Yeah, well, come on in. So those are the big rocks of the chapter. I have like loads of things underlined. Some of these are just for my sake. The other thing I would criticize here is I feel like all the examples he gives are procedural knowledge. I'm imagining what would happen if we had something, say, about geometric construction.
Prepare to be iterated.
For example. Right? Like, how would this work in that context? Or how would it work to you know, some of these topics that might not have as clearly defined procedure. I even don't like that word. It's a more conceptual thing, or something that happens as a one-off rather than a, you know, there are some topics, for instance, where we talk about prime numbers, and yes, you can make factor trees, but maybe like talking about things that aren't calculational. Maybe that's the way to say it, or things that are like
sometimes I think about like mathematical competition problems, right? Like, how do you think about those kinds of things? And maybe that's not exactly what you're talking about, but that's a way different way of thinking about something. Mm-hmm. It's not procedural. It's like you actually have to sit and stew there for quite some time before you maybe think about a way to try to tackle the problem, and it might not even be right.
Because I could imagine, as I'm thinking about a geometry class, and maybe we'll put this on the wheel in just a few minutes when we get there. We're almost there, chat. So if you want to like think about what topics you want to submit to our wheel, we reserve the right to veto, but we will consider every option that's put in chat.
No Veroni diagrams, Jeff. No
Veroni diagrams, I think. But like I wonder if we have I can picture a task where you're solving for missing angles, mm-hmm. and it'll be scaffolded, right?
Yep.
However, it's hard for me to pin down maybe something with, say, writing proofs of properties of a quadrilateral.
Right. It's not quite as straightforward what you would use. Is that what you mean? Or like the pathway?
Or like the strategy. The strategy here is very inductive in nature. So it requires that you have some kind of pattern that you can exploit, and it's typically a calculational task. Whereas if I have something in math curricula that is not computational, I'm using geometric proof as an example, mm-hmm. but you could imagine like maybe comparing linear and quadratic growth, or maybe even linear, quadratic, and exponential growth. Maybe it's looking at the differences of sine and cosine functions, or maybe it's comparing box and whisker plots and histograms, or something like that. And notice how I'm using the word compare here.
Yeah.
When I'm doing something that requires some conceptual comparison, rather than doing calculational things, I think Liljedahl sort of assumes implicitly that math is calculational in nature, that is one aspect of mathematics, but it's not the whole of mathematics.
Right. Yeah, like a lot of data analytics is actually breaking the mold of, I can't just give you the answer. You actually have to do some analysis and then come to a conclusion and convince me about your conclusion, right? Like that's a very different way of thinking about something.
And frankly, if we're going the data analytics route, that conclusion can be different depending on the tests you're running. If you run an inference test, like a t-test, right, that has different implications than running something that, like, so you can imagine, for instance, the data you pull and the associations and the correlation. I'm not thinking of associations in the linear regression sense, but like you can have regressions along several different variables, and some variables may matter more to you personally than others, even though they may be statistically insignificant. So you may have this argument you have to make, even though the stats may be the same for everybody, your interpretation of those stats is different, which requires, I feel, a different kind of thinking.
Yeah. Like definitely there's, at least in our programs, there's a lot of who's your audience and how are you going to take what you know and deliver that material to that specific audience, right? So it's very contextual, like you said.
Mm-hmm. You have to avoid bias and so on. Anyway, those are all questions to think about. Hello, Kilobyte.
Liljedahl, welcome in. Happy Thursday to you too.
Yeah. Welcome on in. We're chatting about things. I think it's a good time now to end Chapter 9's discussion for now. I don't know that this is going to be the end of that discussion, but completely. But I think this is a good time to jump into some actual doing. And a lot of the questions at the end of this chapter about implementation were about trying to do something about all this. Scaffolding anything where the students can make choices seems tricky. Yeah. Right? Like it is. Yeah, it is Hamiltonian. This is such a tricky topic, right? Like, how do you scaffold that? And I think these are conversations for later. I do think, though, that Liljedahl does have a good point for calculation-based tasks. Though these are things you can inductively notice patterns and be like, okay, maybe I don't have a proof for this yet, but I can do some computations and maybe notice some patterns that will help me develop a proof.
I did get the sense in this chapter, Zach, that he was talking about scripted curricular tasks. That's how he thinks about these things. So like it's very much, I'm looking at the curriculum, there's a very clear kind of end goal, and there's usually a path to get to that end goal kind of given to you in the curriculum documents, right? So that's what it felt like he was talking about in this chapter.
And I think just to add on to that, because that's a very important point, I guess I'm looking at the operative words in the standards. It's more like these work well for calculation tasks. So if it says students will be able to calculate missing angles in a diagram, that's great. But then if I say students will be able to prove properties of quadrilaterals, the word prove is operatively different than the word calculate. I guess that's the distinction I'm drawing. It's not like I agree completely, but some curricular tasks are going to be have a goal whose goal is not to calculate, but to reason or to do some proof activity. And I'm curious what this would look like in that kind of context.
Gotcha. Yeah, that makes sense.
I will say one last thing and then we can go over to the wheel. Maybe you can get the wheel set up while I'm saying this.
Oh.
But, right. I actually got it. So Mrs. Pye has a copy of Liljedahl's book that has sample tasks already put together. It's actually a huge volume. Something like 700. It looked like 700 pages or something like that. It's just this big book, and it has like all these tasks you can use and how students might approach them, already written down and all of that. It's a really interesting. I just discovered it between our last two episodes, and as I was flipping through it, a lot of the feelings I was getting were that these were all computation-based tasks. The one he did a good job of creating those, but I wonder what it would look like if we didn't do something computational. So again, that's that. All right, the Wheel of Terror, or the Wheel of Destiny, or whatever we're going. Wheel of Destiny.
Wheel of Terror. Is that what you just said?
It could be the Wheel of Terror. I mean, if we get something from Jeff, I mean, it could be the Wheel of Terror.
True. What grade level do you want to focus on today? Should we stick to a grade level?
I think we should stick to the grade band. I think the 6 through 8 grade band is a good one.
Okay.
For our purposes today. So if we could stick to grade 6 through 8, that would be awesome.
Cool.
Anyone in chat that wants to suggest a topic that would fit somewhere in that range, we'll be loosey-goosey if you want to be like 5 or 9. Like these grade levels may be distinct, not so like easily to distinguish. But if you want to pick a topic between somewhere in that range, we will consider your topic, and as long as it's reasonably within that range, we'll add it to the wheel. What we'll do is we'll spin based off of all of your suggestions, and we will try to plan a lesson on that suggestion that comes up from the wheel spin. We do, actually. I like, so Jeff and I have been chatting. So Hamiltonian wants to do something with transformations.
Okay.
So some kind of rigid transformation, I think, or even non-rigid, because you can do a dilation or enlargement, as Hamiltonian says. So let's do something with rigid or non-rigid transformations.
I'm just going to put transformation since it will actually
fit
on the, and we'll figure it out later.
That's great. Okay. Rex suggests probability.
Oh, that's a fun one.
I think a good one. We could talk about like the definition of probability and what that means. Jeff has several suggestions, And of the suggestions, I wonder if the one about properties of triangles is a good one. So things like medians and angle bisectors and all that. I like the locus of points for conic sections, but that might be it's outside the grade band for me. I wouldn't mind talking about it, but
locus of points, that feels more like it could land, I think, in the high school curriculum.
Yeah, and usually I've seen that in a pre-calculus course, but that's not wrong. I think for our purposes today, to illustrate the process of what we're trying to get at, and like how to build a thinking task in a scaffolded way, this might be better to do with 6 through 8 today.
Yeah, I'm going to take a peek at what's going on in my province with regards to
the irony of putting probability on a probability wheel. That's beautiful. I will add one. So sure. I have one to submit. Creating box plots.
Box plots, okay.
Yeah, I want to do something with creating box plots today, and like talking about quartiles and so on. You can submit one as well. I think if you have something. Sounds a little applied. I'm putting it in there because I have no idea what I'll do with it yet. I was just thinking about this before stream started, and I was like, what's something that I've never really dealt with before, that I've had to never really teach a lesson on before? And that was something I don't think or at least I don't do it often. I did it when I taught AP Stats, but technically it's a 6th grade standard for us in the US.
I'm going to put in ratios, because I feel like that's always something that happens in this band that needs to get a lot of love and attention.
Japanese candle graphs.
What is a Japanese candle graph?
I think I've seen one before.
True?
I'm not picturing anything.
Candlestick chart.
Oh, there it is.
Oh, okay. It's just an up and down box plot.
Yeah, but it's a whole bunch of them usually.
Oh, it's one of the financial charts.
Yeah, it's a financial plot. Yeah.
Yeah.
I want to say I've heard of this before.
I know them as just candlestick charts.
Okay, so here we go. I think we're ready.
Is that we just want those 5?
3D pie charts with shadows? Please no. Pie charts to me are of the devil.
Pie charts are the worst. And then if you put a shadow on it, you alter 3D and a shadow. You're going to alter all of the properties that are helpful about a pie chart. Okay, are we happy with these, Zach?
I'm happy with these.
We'll spin.
Let's do it.
Okay, do I have a drum roll? I don't think I have a drum roll.
Okay.
Oh.
There you go. There's my table.
Oh, are we gonna get box plots?
Come on, box plots!
Oh,
come on, box plots! Let's go! Yes! Yes!
Okay, the winner is box plots. Okay, Zach wins today. What are the odds of that?
Since he says rigged.
Rigged? Yeah, a little bit. Okay.
The plot thickens.
Box plots.
I have no idea what I'm going to do yet. So this is literally, I'm not sure.
I feel like that's the joy of this. Oops, that's not what I want to do.
So I'm pulling up the 6th grade math standards because I said they were in there, and if I recall, they are.
Your standards are much better than mine. So I have very low standards, Zach. We should go with your high standards for this task.
Yep, here we go. So here is standard 6. Okay.
The box plot thickens, Hamiltonian.
All right, so I'm pulling out standard 6.sp.4.
I mean, ratios could have been applied, Jeff.
It could have been applied. All right, so here we go. We're going to zoom in that much, I think. Okay, can you see that?
Yeah, okay. I'm going to just...
We'll pull in...
Actually, I'm just going to zoom in a little bit so that we can see it a bit. There we go.
So here's a standard. Seeing if there's any other box plot related things in the standards.
Display numerical data in plots on a number line, including dot plots, histograms, and box plots. Choose the most appropriate
I'll throw in this one
plot for the data collected.
I'll throw in this one as well because it's sort of related. This one's number SP5.
Yeah, because some of those measures of center are going to be helpful in making the box plot too.
Yeah.
Relating the choice of measures of center and variability to the shape of the data distribution and the context in which the data were gathered. Interesting.
So here's where I wonder. Like, I'm trying to think of what to do with this. Like I said, I have no idea. I've only taught this once in my teaching career, and I don't even remember how I did it. It was so long ago. It's like 10 years ago when I last did this. So, but I don't even remember what I did in AP Stats. So I'm going to literally start new and just say, what are the things? Why do we have a box plot? What is the purpose of it? Right? When you draw this, and for those who haven't seen a box plot before, the idea is you have a data set, and in that data set, I probably ought to draw actual lines, huh? This would be important. The way it works is you have a data set. Come on. There we go. Okay, so we have a data set, and the data set is bounded by an upper and lower entry, a maximum or a minimum, right? And then that data set also contains a median. We'll label all these in a minute. And then that data set could also have what we call the first and third quartiles. Actually, I should just draw the box this way. There we go. So maybe the box looks something like this. I'll make it asymmetric just to emphasize what the distribution is doing. But can I do these not rounded? I want square heads. There we go. that looks very odd.
Yes, I'm very happy with that change.
I didn't know you could do that. So now I know. Okay, make that bold. I also don't love the stroke styles, the sloppiness of this. Oh my gosh. You have a sloppiness option? That's ridiculous.
Sloppiness option?
I'm not joking. This is not a joke. Who are no quintiles and no median because? Okay.
Quintiles, oh my gosh.
Yeah. Anyway. So technically, if you wanted to be very technical, this would be considered Q0, and this would be considered Q4. Okay, so here we go. Our goal is to be able to create diagrams that look like this and be able to compare distributions. What this tells you is where data lies, right? So if I were to say 75% of my data is in between quartile 1 and quartile, or 50% of my data, sorry, 50% lies between quartile 1 and quartile 3, this box tells me something about where that 50% lies. And in each of these little ranges, as Penn is pointing out, there's 25% of my data, right?
Yep.
So what's interesting is, say you have a box plot that, here's the one, but you could, I'm going to move this over just ever so slightly so that I can play around with maybe a different, oops. Let's just move these around a bit.
I know Obi is getting excited about the fingies too. I haven't heard the term
The
fingies in
fingy.
a long
I
time.
haven't heard fingies in a very long time,
Fingy
man.
wingies, yeah, and
You,
toesy
if,
woesies.
if you know, you know. You
For
know.
those of you that have been around here a significant, a significant portion of time, you know what we're talking about.
Yeah. It's been a long time since I've seen that meme, or that little emote. Okay, so here is, let's just say these are classes taking a standardized test. I'm being boring here, but we can probably come up with a better context. But let's just say, we're going to make this one Penn's class, Mr. Penn. I don't know. Do you like that?
Sure, doesn't matter.
Does that work? I'm just gonna go with lean in here and do it.
I'm still trying to figure out where you're going, so
I'm making this up as I go. That's what we do here. We make it up, and we're gonna call it Dr. Zach. Okay. Okay. So these are my classes, and these are our classes. We took the same test, and Dr. Zach had scores like this, and Mr. Penn had scores like this. And I think one of the key things we want to be able to talk about is what these plots are telling us. I'm not putting labels on numbers here because, just for the sake of argument, like what could we conclude about this graph versus this graph, assuming like I had some standardized scale that, let's just say our 0 to 100 for the sake of simplicity. Here's our 0 to 100. We'll make this nice and bold. We have 0 down here. And 100 is our max score.
I see.
What can we say about these distributions?
Do you mind?
Right?
I'm just going to erase some of the extra information that's
Great.
Overloading me a little bit. So let's just get rid of some.
That's
of that.
fine. I was just I'm making sure that those who don't know what this is know what's going on. That was just more of like here's a lowdown of what is going on. So I'm just making this data up. We have this distribution here, and we have Dojo saying percentiles are better. Yeah, so they represent multiple students in your classes, multiple data points. Yes, they would. So like pretend I'm plotting this data, and this is my data from my class, and this is Penn's class. What can we say about the data of these classes? That's what we're doing. You're saying, see, this is a question, right? So Jeff brings up an excellent question. Do we assume the same number of students or not? See, that's one of the things that dot plots or box plots hide, is how many students are there?
Maybe I only have 4 students, right? I only have 4.
Right. You don't have 4.
Yeah.
I think you have to have 5 to make this work, but we'll say 5.
To make it simple, I guess. Yeah.
So to keep it simple, we could say that Penn Center has 5, and maybe I have like 30 or something like that. Like that.
Something
that
divisible by 5,
things,
right?
though.
Yeah.
Right. So if I did the answer isn't clear just by looking at the plot. But if I say like mine is n equals 30, and Penn is n equals 5, that would you might interpret this differently, wouldn't you?
Wider quartiles don't necessarily suggest fewer students. Actually, the same number of students have to be in each one of these quartiles, right? 25%.
25% of them.
It's just showing us information about the spread of those particular students' scores, right?
Yes, it's telling. Yeah, so that's the thing. Do your rulers sync? Fewer samples means larger standard deviation.
Correct, but we're not really looking at standard deviation in a box plot.
Yeah, it's hard to tell. That's something that's masked from us, right? Look, I would need a histogram to be able to talk about standard deviation, I think.
Right, and I actually usually like putting a histogram in conjunction with a box plot to get all the kind of measurements in a visual kind of way.
And so I guess this is what I'm trying to say. Like, I look at this, and the conclusion I draw is that statistically, my median is lower than yours, suggesting that my middle student is maybe just either performed poorly on this test in comparison to your group, right? Median-wise, there's a very clear difference. If I look at the max scores, those are nigh close to each other, and the min scores are more extremely far apart, right? Now, it looks to me like I have a wider span for my upper 25%, but these are much closer. So, like, you notice how small this box is and how close it is to the median versus over here, I have a much wider spread.
Yeah.
There seems to be more variation here.
Yeah, your middle group of students definitely has a lot more variation than my middle group of students, right?
Right. Isn't the 25th to 75th percentile range a measure of standard deviation? So it's a measure of variation. I wouldn't say it would be a measure of standard deviation, but it's a measure of variation. Like you have
Hamiltonian
of spread. Measure of spread.
Measure of spread is what we usually say. Yeah,
that's what I was looking for, the phrase measure of spread. But you don't say that's necessarily standard deviation, because that requires a more intense calculation than what's available here. You have to actually take the deviations from the mean and sum them and square them, and we don't know.
Can someone fact check show on that? For normalized data, the standard deviation is approximately the interquartile range divided by 1.349. I did not know that. That's actually
for a normal distribution. See, that assumes normal distribution.
It does, yes.
Right?
Yeah.
So
ours are not. Ours are not.
We can't necessarily say that here. If they were normal, then I'd have a perfectly symmetric box plot.
Oh, and then I guess you could use your probabilities to find the endpoints and actually probably get that 1.349 that Joe's talking about. Okay, that makes more sense.
Yeah, if you wanted to do that, you could. But here, I don't think we can say much about standard deviation. You might be able to say more about yours, Penn, because you happen to have as many data. You know what the data points are. You could figure them out and calculate standard deviation. But with mine, you could not, because there's too many. I only know 5 data points here out of 30, and
you'd have to take like an average or something, right?
And even those 5 data points aren't necessarily members of my set. They don't have to be. It's like you could have a median that is halfway between 2 data points, right? So, okay, so like we're just talking about the what a box plot represents, but now looking at these standards. We want students to be able to look at be able to create a box plot based off of a data set and compare it against other ones, right? So I wonder, or maybe, like you said, maybe histograms and comparing and contrasting those together would be helpful then. I don't know.
I guess I would ask, when is it appropriate? Like, when does it make sense to use a box plot? It probably makes sense to use a box plot when we want to use the median rather than the average or the mean, right? And that's so in what instances would we normally use a median measurement rather than a mean measurement? Probably when it's not a normal distribution.
That's right, which these aren't. And like we have these, our classes are very different in this case.
Right. So we need to maybe find a situation where we suspect the data collected would be skewed, right? And then maybe kind of go from there. Mm-hmm. I'm just, again,
never use the mean, Dojo says. What do kids take in grades 6 through 8 these days? It's just that they call it middle school math. It's not like there's a name of a course, but the course is a hodgepodge of different topics, right? So 6th grade typically will talk about ratios, proportions, data analysis, which is, there's been this big push towards data analysis, but even in the standards that currently exist in the previous iteration back in 2016, I think is when these were made, they still expect students to have a data literacy. And I actually wanted to talk about this topic because often teachers don't get to spend time on this topic, and I hope that changes. This is actually sort of me also having a subtle, like, I wish this were more of a discussion we have, because there's so much data illiteracy, and I think these conversations we're having are super important.
So Zach, when Joe and I went to make activities for, we're doing this in high school for data analytics as a feeder program into the college, One of the activities that we decided to use was one where we gave students magnets and we asked a question, right? Like, how many hours of sleep did you get last night? And then we had like 0 to 12 or something like that. And we had and we're going to have the students like put their magnets down.
Okay.
So I guess that's a way of visualizing a histogram. But can we utilize that information to also develop like a starting point for talking about box plots, right? So I think, like, for me, the starting point is, let's gather the data, let's talk about what pieces of the data feel important, and then I think that leads us to a discussion about, okay, are we going to use some kind of histogram, or are we going to use some kind of box plot?
So maybe it's making a choice about what data display we should use. Maybe that should be the more of the focus, is what you're saying, is maybe we choose the data display that's appropriate for our data set.
Yeah, I kind of see it in one of two ways. Either we have to purposefully give them something that is skewed, or we just naturally collect the data by asking a question and then have students reflect on what that looks like. And then that leads into the conversation of how do we best visualize this data.
So that's a good one. Now, this is where I'm trying to merge Liljedahl here, because I'm looking at what Liljedahl's offering and saying, okay, what's inductive about this process? Like, what are the things, if I'm asking the question that we talked about earlier, how do I make this something that students can be at a vertical non-permanent surface and talk about? We probably want some pictures of this data set, right? Do we want the students making the plots, or do we want them looking at the plots and making decisions?
Right.
So I think that's the first question, is, are these going to be things, like, because part of me says we should give these to the student ahead of time. We should make some plots and say, like we have here, say I have these two classes of students, what can we say about them? And maybe having them juxtaposed with a histogram would be helpful at first. Like, maybe to get an idea of what the box plot is measuring, they need some kind of way to connect to a histogram, seeing the full distribution, and then maybe making some inferences about what that distribution could be if I just gave them a box plot. Like, what could the distribution look like?
If we gave them a histogram, or if we gave them a box plot?
If we give them a box plot, like, what would the distribution look like, right? So start off by saying, here's we're going to show you what this, you've seen a histogram before, so maybe we assume that knowledge coming in, just for the sake of argument, and say, okay, I'm going to introduce you to a new plot type called a box plot. And in order to do this, we're going to connect this to a histogram and have students do sort of a notice and wonder thing, where they say, okay, what does this histogram tell us about, and how does this histogram connect to the box plot? Oh, well, I have a median, I have these endpoints, and I have, like, these quartiles that seem to exist, but I'm like, how do I figure out where they go, and so on and so forth. But they can connect the distribution to the representation of the box plot and what it says. So, and then
go ahead.
Go ahead. Yeah, finish.
I was going to say that I like that idea, and we could start it out very straightforward. So if we assume they know what a histogram looks like, let's just give them one that's relatively normal shaped, right? So that is going to lead to a very symmetric looking box plot. And then maybe the small adjustments we do are, like, we start moving that center over, right? And start skewing the data a little bit in hopes that, well, I mean, someone's going to say, okay, well, obviously the box plot's getting a little stretched on one side, right? And that, to me, that feels like the important thing that we want them to see, right? Like, as the data starts to move in one direction or the other, there's going to be information that the box plot captures quickly in a visual manner.
Right. So then ultimately we have, at the very end, something where they can look at a box plot and make some inferences about what the distribution looks like, but it allows for some variation because students won't have uniform answers. right? There's data that's lost in a box plot. We want to make that clear. Like as we're talking about, like Jeff's question's a great one. Is this a data set with 30 or with 5 people, right? Or is this how many data points are in this thing? We can't tell. Things like that are abstracted away.
That could be one of the minor changes, though, right? Like we could say, okay, here's the histogram, and here's what the box plot looks like. That histogram only has 5 spots on it, right? 5 ticks.
Right.
And then we have the exact same box plot with 20 or 30 ticks, right? I think there's a way we could do that, and it would be a really interesting way to get that information from the groups, right, of the students that we're working with.
Also, Singular has a good point here. How about some simple logical fallacies expressed mathematically, right? Like we could talk about things we couldn't deduce. So things that would be fallacious to say about these plots. Maybe have some statements. Are they true or false about these things? That could be another option. Like what can we say about the median or the mean or the mode or whatever of these distributions? I don't know if that would be relevant, or maybe we go along this first idea first.
I like the idea of the first one because it's very clear to me how we can start with the base and how we can make small adjustments to that base to try to tease out information. That's what I like about the first approach.
And just for fun, I think Jeff has brought up something, and I've seen the extreme version of this. I didn't know it by this name, but this is interesting. It's the same idea as when I've seen a correlation plot that they make like 10 different plots that are scatter plots with the same correlation coefficient. One of them in the shape of a dinosaur. But you can basically saying that R squared is a stupid metric, and they show that all of these have the same.
Yeah.
You've probably seen similar things.
This is a Datasaurus.
Yeah, Datasaurus, that's the one.
Yeah, the Datasaurus doesn't. That's the one you're talking about because it.
That's the one.
Because it has a dino, and it has the same average and standard deviation as all the other things. Yeah.
That's another one that I love.
Yeah, we use this in our introductory class. Yeah.
Right.
And someone called it Ens Combosaurus. I think that's kind of funny, actually. Yes, exactly. The big rule here is that summarizing the data can
lose vital information. And that's sort of the point, right? That's one of the big mathematical concepts we want students to realize, is that a box plot abstracts data, but we get to see certain things at a glance that can be useful in comparisons when I'm just looking at medians and quartiles.
I mean, if I'm looking at this dinosaur, where's the median, right? I can kind of roughly see where the min is and roughly see where the max is, but where's the median, right? And where's my data lying? Is it evenly distributed between like 20 and 100? I don't know, right? Like there's an arm here that has a big cluster.
Yeah. Okay. Just this picture. I think we need that picture somewhere in the. You want something? We gotta have the dinosaur. Datasaurus doesn't. It's a good picture. Since we're talking about data sciencey things. Yeah. Okay, let's I think this is a good place to end this discussion, and we'll continue next time on March 12th. That's our next episode.
Yes,
and we will.
I forgot we do have 2 more. Yeah, 2 more.
Yeah, we have March 12th
and penultimate. We're only at the pen semi.
The penultimate. The penultimate.
It's also very bright. I apologize, Chad. The natural light is. I need to go over here.
Well, 12 and 26. Those are the days in March that we're going to be doing this again, which ironically, although not ironically, are the same dates for February because 28 days. We're not in a leap year, friends. But we will be back, and we may do a little bit more with chapter 9. We're going to have a private conversation, I think, between the two of us, discuss where the next steps for this book are. I think we decided on some chapters previously. I just don't remember
9 and 10 were the big focus.
I think there were a few others, though, and we may bring in some.
I think like the note-taking, the kind of formative assessment pieces might be interesting to look at. Like, I'm certainly curious at like 11, 12, and 13, I think. Mm-hmm. So anyway, looking forward to more of these data science conversations over the next couple weeks. Until then, let's go say hi to science and have a fantastic rest of your day, guys. We'll see you in a couple weeks. Take care.